Good morning, Keith Tebow from FRC Media. Thank you for joining us. As we did for the primary election, we're spending some time speaking to some of the candidates who will be on the state election ballot on November 8th. This morning, I'm pleased to be joined by someone we spoke to in September. She is State Senator Diana DiZoglio. She is the Democratic nominee for state auditor. Senator, thank you for joining me again. How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for having me back on. It's always my honor and privilege to come on and to have the opportunity to speak with residents across our communities and make sure that folks have access to information regarding our platform and what we're planning to do as your next state auditor.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations on winning the Democratic primary. So let me just ask you before we get started, what did you learn during the primary process, and what do you think will be different over the next, so many weeks before the state election?
Yeah, look, we heard from residents across regions in Massachusetts who talked about, issues pertaining to access to healthcare, access to housing, access to, a great opportunity for an education, whether it be, going through our public school system, in the elementary years all the way through early intervention to elementary years, all the way through, accessing higher educational opportunities. Folks right now have been talking about how they're struggling to pay the high cost of gas prices. Inflation is through the roof right now. We have a lot of work to do in state government to make sure that our tax dollars are not being wasted or abused or fraudulently spent. So I'm hearing the same types of things that I heard through the Democratic primary season, in the general election season as well. We're still talking to all residents as we were during the Democratic primary season. And folks are saying the same types of things. They want a state auditor who will be our next chief accountability officer, make sure to stand up, speak truth to power, regardless of party affiliation. I'm very proud of the fact that in a state Senate, I do hold the most independent voting record in the state Senate. That's a record that I've held for the last few years of my service in the legislature. I'm very proud of that record. And I think it's important that we have an independent voice as our next state auditor who can stand up regardless of party affiliation to the powers that be up on Beacon Hill to make sure that our tax dollars, the tax dollars that we as working families work so hard for, are being spent efficiently and effectively and are not being wasted.
Yeah. You know, in this race, you're facing a Republican, Anthony Amore, but there's also three third-party candidates that are on the ballot. Does that change your approach at all? Because there's a possibility that, votes may be split, and in terms of, handling that type of scenario.
Yeah, you know what? Look, I've actually spoken with all four candidates that are running alongside of me. So there's five candidates in total
Right.
running for state auditor, and I'm looking forward to engaging in hopefully multiple debates with those other candidates, where all five of us are going to have an opportunity to share our platforms and our visions and our views for the state auditor's office. I think by making sure that we're hearing from all voices, it helps democracy, and it makes sure that all of our visions are getting out there. So certainly, I know folks tend to focus on the two major party candidates, but you are right, and thank you for bringing that up. There are actually five candidates for state auditor right now. I'm campaigning not against anybody. I'm campaigning for the seat and making sure that I'm getting my platform and my vision out there, which is, something that I've been talking about for almost a year and a half now at this point, making sure we're auditing the state legislature, making sure that we are auditing the abuse of taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreements that protect powerful politicians and use our tax dollars to do it, from having to face the music about potential misdeeds, harassment, discriminatory behavior in state government. That should not be happening. I'm going to audit those NDAs. I'm also going to conduct an audit of the MBTA. I've committed to conducting a safety audit of the MBTA. There are a lot of different things that I have committed to auditing, that many of which can actually be found in my audit plan, which is on my website. If you go to www.dianaforma.com, dianaforma.com, you will find my social justice and equity audit plan. And a lot of this has to do, when we talk about things like equity, for example, with regional equity. Look, in Fall River, I can say I've been working alongside of your state delegation, whose support I have in this race for years. Senator, Rodrigues. I have worked alongside of Carol Fiola, representative, and Representative Alan Sylvia, and many others from the region whose support I have in this race on issues impacting gateway cities, Fall River, Lawrence, Methuen, Haverhill. I come from the city of Lawrence, the city of Methuen originally, and I still live here. And I'm, zooming from my home in Methuen. We're a gateway city. We're a community that struggles to get regional equity and to be treated fairly by our state government in terms of resources and policies that help the average working family in our community. And when I've spoken to your state delegation in Fall River that I've been working with for years now, we have oftentimes partnered on making sure that there is regional equity and that our communities who are often disenfranchised and not treated as respectfully as they should be are actually getting the access that they deserve. So I'm going to take that with me, that experience, that focus it for the last 10 years, going line by line in that state budget with me to the state auditor's office and use the work that I've been doing alongside of your state officials there locally to the next level in the auditor's office to make sure that communities like Fall River, like New Bedford, like Taunton, the surrounding areas have the voice that they deserve. And all the surrounding communities as well, who oftentimes get dismissed and ignored due to regional inequities that continue, unfortunately, to exist across our state.
Yeah. One quick question before I move on, getting back to, facing off against, 4 other candidates in the race. Are you open to debates with everyone? I know sometimes, the Democrat or Republican in the race would tend to say, well, we don't want to include the third party candidates. You're okay with including everyone?
Yes, and I have actually challenged my Republican opponent who did send me an email last week challenging me only to a debate. And my response was, of course, I'm happy to debate, but I do believe when he had highlighted the need for regional equity, my response was, I think that there needs to be candidate equity as well. And I highlighted the fact that there are 3 other candidates besides just the Democrat and the Republican. And I absolutely 100% think that they should get an invitation. And I've expressed that to media outlets, and I've expressed that to the Republican in this race as well, that those folks deserve a seat at the table as well. They collected 5,000 signatures, just like we did. And I believe that those candidates deserve to have an opportunity to debate as well. And I've been making that clear. So I have said to folks who have reached out regarding debates, happy to debate multiple times. But right now, we are focused on debates that are inclusive of all 5 candidates, and we'll invite all of us to participate in those debates so that folks have access to, knowing about all the candidates and then making their decision.
Right. You stated on your website that Massachusetts is currently the least transparent government in the country. You've been a state representative and a state senator. You've seen some of this firsthand. You talk about some of the initiatives, and we'll get into more in a moment. But how in general, from what you've seen, that you'd like to change specifically in terms of that transparency of state government?
Right. Well, the administration is not subject to the public records law. I think that it should be. The legislature is not subject to the public records law. As somebody who's served in the legislature for 10 years, I can say the legislature needs to be subject to the public records law. And I've been supportive of efforts to make them subject to the public records law for many years now. The state auditor has the ability to go in and to open up the books and to look at what's actually happening and to identify shortfalls and gaps in processes and procedures. A lot of folks hear the word auditor, and I get a chuckle out of this, but many times folks will say, well, don't audit me. And, I respond with, we don't audit individuals. We do not audit folks in our communities. We are not the IRS. We are not coming to audit any one individual or person. The state auditor here in Massachusetts is the state's chief accountability officer, and she investigates and audits state agencies and organizations that receive state funding to make sure that our tax dollars that we work hard for, that we're sending into the state, are used efficiently and effectively. But she also is able to do not just quantitative audits, but qualitative audits to make sure that these agencies are operating efficiently and effectively. Now, I'm the only candidate in this race who has said that I will be conducting an audit of the state legislature. You talked about transparency and accountability. The legislature is not subject to the public records laws. Our committee votes are not made public, so folks don't always know how we as legislators have voted on particular issues. Taxpayer funded by all of you, non-disclosure agreements continue to be able to be abused to silence government workers about potential abuse, harassment, and discrimination. And power is centralized into the hands of a few. I will be a state auditor that goes in the first days in office, begins the process of auditing the state legislature and making sure that our legislative branch is held accountable. And that is how I will seek to increase transparency and accountability up on Beacon Hill on day one. Of course, we will be auditing other state agencies as well as the days go on, but we will be starting with the legislature, which has not received an audit for many, 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 many years, and it is beyond past time that occur.
Yeah. A lot of your platform items on your website mention diversity and making sure that equity drives what you do. Massachusetts is obviously controlled by big D Democrats in terms of its legislature and in terms of many of the state offices. Looks from the outside, a lot of other states consider us very liberal. So the question is, what can you do that's already been being done on a statewide level in terms of diversity and equity through the state auditor's office?
Yeah, great question. Actually, if you go to my website, dianaforma.com, and you click on Read My Audit Plan, the first 3 points of my audit plan include expanding diversity, equity, and inclusion in Massachusetts and working on that particular issue as it pertains to, or working on that in the particular issue of state contracting and our procurement procedures. So right now in Massachusetts, only 0.005% has been identified in our state contracts as going out to minority businesses. Now, billions of dollars are spent in state contracts on an annual basis. Billions in our state tax dollars are going out to these contracts through state government. And yes, you are right. There's a Democratic controlled legislature, and most folks, up on Beacon Hill are registered Democrats, but yet still we are lacking in these DEI goals that we hear pontificated about very often up on Beacon Hill. It's unfortunate that even though diversity, equity, and inclusion are mentioned quite often up on Beacon Hill, our state contracts reflect the exact opposite. So 0.005% is completely unacceptable and frankly embarrassing for the state of Massachusetts to have when it comes to our state contracting. So we have a lot of work to do. And the way that I seek to use the auditor's office to expand, in terms of equity and inclusion, is to make sure that we are examining those RFPs, the procurement processes, and the procedures surrounding how we contract in Massachusetts. Massport has a pretty decent model when it comes to making sure that certain DEI provisions are met. They have a 25-point inclusion model that was worked on by actually a friend of mine, Ken Turner. He had spoken with me about how the Massport model makes sure that there are certain points in their system. They have a 100-point inclusion model, and 25 out of those 100 points have to do with making sure that there are certain diversity, equity, and inclusion points that are being met when it comes to granting a state contract to a business. Now, they saw some tremendous success with this when it comes to the Seaport, Omni Seaport model that was actually covered many different times in Boston. They saw some successes with this. And I think that, look, that's a great model to start with and to hold other agencies to regarding how they are handling their RFPs and their procurement processes and their state contracting procedures. We can start there and we can analyze state agencies and do a comparative analysis, so to speak, to make sure that we are, at least adhering to that 25-point inclusion model to start. Then once we gauge how state agencies are actually implementing some of these processes and procedures, then we can get to work on making sure to recommend policies and changes that might need to occur and to fill those gaps that clearly exist with only 0.005% going out to minority businesses in Massachusetts.
Yeah, is there a fear at all that this could create, in some cases, some undue burdens on some small businesses that want to, bid for some of these contracts where they may look at it and they say, boy, this we'd like to do this, but as a small business, there's a lot of extra red tape here potentially that may actually drive away some potential bidders for contracts.
I believe the exact opposite to be true,
Okay.
actually. Right now, I mean, look, I was the chair of the Small Business Committee. That's why this is such an incredibly important issue for me. I live on the New Hampshire border where our small business community, our, small mom and pop restaurants, our hair salons, our nail salons, our little retail stores that are in the downtowns, they have been facing incredible challenges up on the New Hampshire border when it comes to keeping business local here in the state of Massachusetts. They've been battling things like the sales tax, where in a community like mine, I live in Methuen, remember, the New Hampshire border is, we live in a border community. Salem, New Hampshire is right, not even 5 minutes down the road. So folks can go shopping in New Hampshire. They can go and they can get all of their things that they need in New Hampshire, which crushes the small business community here in the Merrimack Valley. And I know that folks in other areas who are trying to run a small business and keep their employees employed are also facing tremendous challenges. So I've gotten a lot of insight from being the chair of the Small Business Committee. And what I have found in that role is that folks are facing incredible barriers to being able to navigate the state contracting process as it stands. And many times they're not even aware that some of these state contracts actually exist because they're not being made salient to them because they're a small business or because they are a minority business. So what's actually happening is our small businesses are not getting adequate access as they should. And I believe that an audit of the processes and the procedures up on Beacon Hill of some of the failures that exist in that regard are going to be helpful to our small business community to show them that these contracts actually exist, identify the process that they need to go through to actually get a fair shot at participating in the process, and then make sure that we're opening up these processes and procedures to everybody and not just to the folks that for years and years and years have been getting access or, maybe, understanding the processes and the protocols a little bit earlier on, right? So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that everybody has a fair shot and that folks in our communities are hearing about these potential opportunities before and not after the decision has already been made.
Yeah. The winner of this race will be replacing incumbent Suzanne Bump, who decided not to run for re-election this year. Are there any initiatives that she has undertaken that you'd like to continue and build upon if elected?
Certainly, yes. Look, Suzanne Bump, the current state auditor, who I just spoke with the other day, we had a great conversation. She, has done some incredible work across the board. Something in particular that I like to highlight about the work that she's done that helps save us as residents taxpayer dollars is the pilot reform work that she's done. Payment in lieu of taxes. Now, it's not something that gets a lot of press coverage. But payment in lieu of taxes, also known as pilot, to make it short, sweet, and to the point for folks, is a program that exists in state government that is meant to compensate our cities and our towns for state-owned land to make sure that those cities and towns are actually getting reimbursed for the funds that they would have been able to receive in revenue otherwise from commercial real estate or residential property taxes, so to speak. And the state is taking up land that the community otherwise would have been able to collect, residential property taxes on. So the state is required by law to reimburse the community for that missing revenue that they otherwise would have been able to receive. Now, why this is important is because if they would have been able to collect residential or commercial property taxes on that land, that's money that goes into your fire departments, your local public safety departments, your schools, maintaining your roads and bridges, paying for the snow and ice removal, all of the local things, funding your local senior center, your council on aging, making sure that our elderly and our disabled, have access to robust programming and assistance in our local communities. But what the auditor actually uncovered in recent years through her audit is that the state has actually not been fully funding the payment in lieu of taxes proposals or mandate that is required of them. So the state has actually been shortchanging our local cities and towns, thereby shortchanging the residents that those local cities and towns serve, and shortchanging those services, such as your fire department, your councils on aging, and your schools and your education departments. So the auditor did identify that, and I think that that was something really great that she did. I want to continue to build upon that work, because look, every wasted dollar in state government, or every dollar that's not sent back to our municipalities that's supposed to be, is another program that goes, on program need that goes unmet or unfulfilled. It's another senior citizen who doesn't get the services that they need. It's another person who needs public safety that doesn't have a firefighter showing up, right? So we need to make sure that we're fully funding these things appropriately. So.
Yeah. On your website, under the category of About You, talks about, why you're running and, the role of the state auditor. But you also have a category it's entitled Diana on Climate. How can an auditor make an impact on climate change here in Massachusetts?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, this was something that was talked about a lot during the course of the last year. Look, I have worked in my community for years on climate change, but in particular, environmental justice, because I grew up in environmental justice communities. Lawrence, Methuen, Fall River, we know, needs, to a champion that will fight for environmental justice. We actually had here in the city of Methuen, we had folks come in who wanted to put, a power plant in our local community, force their way in, put smokestacks up, and we as residents had to fight back against that. We have had Columbia Gas literally blow up our community. Everybody probably remembers, if we think back a few years, to the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. That was my community. We had a gas company, Columbia Gas, not keep up with their safety mandates in our communities and make sure that they were following safety protocols. And as a result, look, our community literally had places blown up as a result. So through the years as a state legislator, I have been working on holding these companies accountable to us, the working families. And I have filed legislation to hold these gas companies accountable. I have filed legislation to keep our waterways clean. We have the Merrimack River that's coming through my area in particular, but I have filed and helped to pass legislation that helps our waterways across Massachusetts to make sure that they are clean, that we have clean drinking water. But as your next state auditor, look, I will get to audit the Department of Public Utilities, for example, and make sure that the administration is actually implementing the laws that we voted on. For example, we voted on the Next Generation Climate Roadmap to make sure that we're meeting our climate goals. As a state auditor, I'll be able to audit the administration to make sure that those things we voted for are actually being followed through on. I have another example, just very briefly, because I know we're running short on time here. But look, the Mass Save program. If you look at your utility bill, we as ratepayers pay into the Mass Save program across Massachusetts, regardless of where we live. That's part of our bill that we pay to these utility companies. Now, we are paying into a program that we hope is distributing those resources equitably to help us to, have clean energy initiatives here in Massachusetts, but also save us money on our energy costs, right? As the ratepayers, we pay into this, and as a result, there are Mass Save programs that are supposed to be coming back to our communities to assist us in saving on our utility payments at the end of the day, by saving on energy costs, by reducing our energy consumption, and increasing clean energy across Massachusetts. Right. Well, what we're actually hearing is that, and there have been studies on this, is that those dollars are actually mostly, the dollars that are coming from our communities, rather, are gateway cities like Fall River, like Lawrence, like Springfield, like Holyoke, that those dollars that are coming from our gateway cities and some of our lower income communities and working class communities, that the dollars are being taken out of those communities, but not really being returned to those same communities at an equitable rate. And that actually money is being taken out of our lower income communities and our working class communities and being funneled to wealthier households and to wealthier communities. And we are seeing a real inequity and the distribution of those resources. So we're paying in, but we're not actually getting back what we're paying into the system as much as some of the more, wealthier affluent communities are. So I have pledged in my audit plan to do a full report on the Mass Save program, highlighting those disparities, the inequities, to make sure that we are not paying into a system that we're not getting a good rate of return on.
Yeah. We only have about a minute or so left. I want to give you the opportunity to speak directly to the voters of Fall River on why they should consider Senator Diana DiZoglio to be our next auditor. So the platform's yours, Senator.
Well, look, I have been already working on behalf of Fall River residents as a state senator. This is my 10th year serving in the legislature, and I've been working alongside of my colleagues in the state legislature for the last 10 years. Folks like Senator Rodrick's, Representative Carol Fiola, Representative Alan Sylvia, and others who have continued to highlight the needs of your community up on Beacon Hill. They've been educating me up on Beacon Hill for years, and I have been taking the votes to send financial resources back to Fall River and surrounding communities. And now as state auditor, I want to make sure that those resources are actually being spent efficiently and effectively, and that you're getting your fair share. I am big on regional equity. It seems all too often up on Beacon Hill like there is not an equitable distribution of the resources, and that the policies that are passed up on Beacon Hill don't always help our working class communities. I was born to a 17-year-old single mother. I grew up housing insecure. We moved around quite a bit. My mom was a young nurse's aide growing up. We moved around based on where my mother could find work. I ended up going through and graduating from our local public school system, going off to community college first, and then getting a full scholarship to become the first in my family to graduate. I know what it's like to have to work hard and to have to be scrappy to make ends meet. I know what it's like to come from a working class, background and to have to work hard for those tax dollars. We work hard for our tax dollars. We deserve to know that our tax dollars are being spent efficiently and effectively and that they're not being wasted, regardless of our family background, regardless of our bank balance, regardless of where we live in the Commonwealth. So I will use my lived experience and my professional experience up at the state house, going line by line in that state budget, already fighting for your community. And I will take that work with me to the state auditor's office to make sure that we all have the voice that we deserve.
State Senator Diana DiZoglio, candidate for state auditor. Thank you for joining us again and informing the people of Fall River. All the best. And hopefully we'll talk to you if you're elected as auditor moving forward.
Thank you so much. I can't do it without you. I respectfully ask for your vote.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us here in FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Please make a point to vote on November 8th.